this is really just kind of looking at it from TSMO from an architecture application side. So we're not necessarily, I'm not going to get into the depths of TSMO, but we're going to touch on what it is. So transportation system management and operations, getting the most out of the facilities we have, not having to build something new, and basically managing things much better. So it's a set of strategies focused on operations. That's where the operations plan comes in, and basically restoring that performance, but using evidence-based information for the process. ITS is about stuff. Operations is about people. That's how we want to kind of separate these two, but they're related to each other because the people need the stuff to do their job, but the focus here is on the operations side of it. So it's what are our goals and objectives as an agency? What problems are we addressing? What kind of strategies? Is it something that's demand oriented or capacity? The services we've talked about today are the tools we use to actually implement those kind of things and give us the tools that we need for operations, evaluation, and execution. The planning for operations. Have you all heard about planning for operations? It's a whole thing within US DOT or Federal Highway. It started back, that's where TSMO evolved out of. But it's really about planning for operations, it's not just about planning for the ITS and the transportation components. We can plan for operations. We have identify objectives for operations. The management and operations strategies are identified. We implement those strategies through a planning, we plan for them, and then we evaluate going back as we've implemented them and getting results from that implementation. So it's really kind of looking at planning from an operations standpoint. Again, about the people, but it depends on effective processes. Have we? And there's a whole. I'm not going to get into it, but there's a whole thing about business maturity models, capabilities and maturity. Those capabilities, the processes that we put in place. You can think about it from evolving from something where we're not coordinating to the point where we are cooperating, integrating our operations together, seeking information from other organizations, and coordinating our activities.
So it's like the people we need and the things we need to do to even achieve all those flows and all those processes.
It's mostly on the operations organizations. They're operating the transportation system.
Right.
Capability and maturity matrix is a big part of what TSMO planning is. But what technologies help us with that? That's where we get back to pulling the architecture in. We start looking at gathering information from the network, providing information out to the travelers, controlling incident management, traffic operations, and then traffic management centers. Those are the kind of technologies you think about assisting with operations, and we can see the parallels there with the architecture when we look at services and what we provide from an architecture standpoint helps us organize that. So it's an integral part of how we look at TSMO is how architecture can help us with attaining those strategies or those objectives for TSMO or for operations going forward. Now, back to this diagram again, laid out a little bit more organized this time, but operations planning right up here in front in the planning side of things. Don't wait for it to come on the other side. We want it to drive what we're putting in for as ITS. So the requirements of operations plans are driving what we have in architecture, essentially. What we need for an IT implementation plan, all the way now that's influencing the architecture. So there's support for it all the way through the process. So when we get to the other side and put these projects in place, it's all driving toward the same thing. It's not just about the overall regional objectives and strategies. It's about our operations strategies as well. So that all feeds into it. So it's pulling it all together. Architecture hits it again. It's like the Swiss Army knife, right? It can help us in different ways. It's not the total answer, but it is a part of the solution and things to consider. All right, I did it in 5 minutes. All right, so that's what I had for you today. I truly appreciate the attention to all this and being engaged in the conversation. The conversations are always the best part of this, in my opinion, because you can understand there's different aspects to this and their perspectives. And I really feel good about the energy that comes with architecture that we've seen so far, and where it goes from here. Get that all laid out. But I think it's really important to keep going and keep it up to date and engage in the process. People can see what's going on and be able to have access to that information. The more stakeholders can get to it easily. That's why the website is so important. They can easily get to it. Thinking about it, that was one of the key points I wanted to make on that. Everybody pulled up that one of the components of RADIT in the outputs is website. And the website we have on the architecture right now is different. We used a different web generator for it that's pulled directly out of the database, but you can actually generate web pages directly out of RADIT. So the thing is, it has a project tab, but all it shows you is the name of the project. Okay, it doesn't really tell you anything more. All the other stuff we have on those project pages in the website is well beyond what RADIT can actually currently do. So just so you know, we generated it differently to be able to provide all that information. And I think that's another important part of what this if you look at the website.
So I know that RADIT can export like a document too, where it's the whole thing. Can you export just a project?
Yes.
As a document?
So the document will just pull up the project.
So like if an agency wants to go to city council and say, hey, this is a future thing we're doing and we're adding it to the MPO's thing, they can export a document that has the whole thing in a better form to read. Okay.
Yep. But I wanted to point out here on the, I lost it again.
Oh, I did that.
Okay.
I thought we were done.
Oh, that's all right. So if you
Sorry.
look at the list of projects, at the bottom, there's a list of example projects. And that's where we did the multimodal accessible travel planning, in-route guidance, and
the pedestrian.
Integrated payment. We also did vulnerable road user safety. There's
a lot in there.
There's
electric vehicle charging.
More in general, kind of playing off of what you guys do with Carmel.
Roundabout traffic
surveillance and analytics. There you go with Volkswagen. And we've labeled it. I put a Z in front of them so they go to the bottom of the list, and then in parentheses example projects. Nobody necessarily came forward. You guys have that one, but you need to look at it, make sure that's what if it makes sense for you. But there's also a connected intersection collision avoidance with connected automated vehicle as an example project. Things to be thinking about, right? And if that fuels kind of discussion, that's important. But those projects are the ones that you guys brought in the review process of the draft. But those examples, oh, there you go.
I just brought that.
Oh, that's the one, yeah. So, this is just another way of kind of conveying something. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be something that's programmed necessarily, if you want people to start thinking about it. Okay, so think about that. To me, the website is the best way to get information out to get them engaged. But hopefully that'll become a little bit more useful too. I haven't done this with any other architecture before. I mean, I think this is a cool, as far as the example projects, I think it's a very valuable thing to do when you start looking at really where you're going. So, and then you just look at long range planning, maybe those things start to fuel that process there too.
Especially this one, because this is one of the new components, right, of the newest architecture.
Right. And when you look through the National Architecture website services list, there's some that are colored yellow, some are colored blue. Those are there was a mistake. We used that to track the things we were doing with the update for 9.2, and we forgot to take the coloring out. But now I looked at it and thought, leave it in there. It's actually helping to understand what changed from 9.1 to 9.2. So it's going to stay in there for a while, and it may become the trend of how we do things going forward. But anything that's colored yellow is a brand new service. Anything that's blue had modifications.
Well, if you do things all over, right, but other regional areas, like what's the maturity of this group or our region?
As far as the architecture is concerned, I think the challenge here is engagement. You guys represent a different group. There's a separation of engagement organizations, and then there's those that just we haven't heard from. We've asked.
Gotcha.
And I don't, architecture is something that people I don't think it's something for them. We have a lot of different towns and cities that are identified in the architecture that I don't think they have much in the way of ITS. You guys are rather unique, really, for the region. So until they get to a point where they say, yeah, ITS is something I definitely want to do. If all they're going to do is maintain their signal system, they're not going to get engaged in this. But when they get to the point of saying, these other technologies are going to help me with my operations, as they start to see demand and need, because their communities are getting too congested or whatever the problem might be, then they start to turn to that. Some of them just aren't there yet.
But you have to communicate with the person that's the connection is information exchange. Right. It's like, who do you exchange information with? So even the smallest town exchanges information between safety officers, for example. Who am I talking to during an emergency? That's kind of where you have to. I've done some work with statewide organizations with GIS, for example. Right. The place where it got powerful or got cooperation is, first of all, you provided money to them, but it was exchange of data. There was exchange of information. Where are the streets? What are your parcel changes? What are your address changes? And now that got communicated. All 92 counties participated, provided information to the state. So now the state has that information they're generating on a regular basis every year. And I think you're going to get that in the emergency E911. So even these smaller communities, you may not talk to the traffic signal person, but the public safety information officer. You would only implement just a portion of the architecture. Right. But it needs to be, like I said, what I think it probably needs, ITS just hits a wall. Even when I see ITS, it hit a wall. So it's got to be, I'm sharing safety information, sharing accident information. Why is Area 6 important for traffic crash data? Well, it's because we want to find out where the most problematic places are region-wide. Right. We want to prioritize. To do that, you have to have the actual location. Prior to Area 6, we got 25% missing that long. You can't find the darn intersections, where the crashes occurred. So that's an exchange of information, not a technology, not a particular signal piece, not signal interrupt, except if they have their one flashing signal, they want to have it interrupted sometime, I imagine. I imagine they don't pay much attention during an emergency. They have one signal. Maybe.
I think, if I compare, I think it's probably not much different than a lot of other places. It's just a magnitude issue.
Yeah.
When I look at Florida,
right.
You think about the large communities they have. Places in Sarasota,
right.
It's a huge community, but it's not a very big place, right? But you got a lot going. They're putting connected vehicle. They're being driven by the state because of connected vehicle application. But below that, we don't get that much interaction, and that's kind of the equation I would put to here.
I got you.
It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you just have in other places, it looks like there's a whole bunch more activity just because they have a whole bunch of big.
Well, just think about Florida's emergency information piece.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh my gosh, 5 hurricanes where you evacuate whole communities and destroys an entire range of infrastructure within 2 days. You've lost thousands and thousands of connections. Yeah, we would have something like that maybe in a major snowstorm,
right?
Or major flooding.
Other scale there.
Yeah. Your scale piece, that's another thing why Florida, even though they don't acknowledge climate change, are still
At a state level.
they even at the state level, they secretly acknowledge climate change. They don't use those words, right? So you got to use the right words. Talk to me. And I don't know what those are.
Yeah, we had someone in the spring talking about that. Someone from the
Yeah.
Florida regional.
From Broward County down in And we asked them, how do you deal with your state legislature that doesn't believe in climate change? They said, well, we just don't say those words. Basically, we're planning for it because it's happening, right? Because Miami is flooding like every day now.
They focus on like the economic impact because that's what gets.
That's right. Well, they also say this is happening. They don't talk about why it's happening. They talk about, well, eventually they do, but they do it secretly off to the side. But it's really important to talk to the right language, to say, well, what are you really trying to do? Well, I'm trying to make sure that the bus system communicates with the emergency services with the signals so that if it's an issue, we do better bus service, or we exchange information if a bus crashes, what's going on. I was thinking about what interrupts traffic flow the most. There are two things. One is construction, one is accidents. If you have a crash, sorry. I've never changed my, and there are always accidents.
It corrects me all the time. Yeah, it's all right.
It crashes, yes. Well, so those two things, I've watched the street light data, the congestion on 69 isn't that great. We've got a lot of capacity there if there's not an accident and if there's not construction. If you have those two things missing, 69 really operates pretty well. But you have a crash and you have a 3-mile backup within 15 minutes. So you've got to have, when you talk about traffic flow, that's really what you drag that back into the public safety realm by saying we have to deal with public safety to make sure that people can have maximum flow on these lines. So it's kind of a different audiences require different messages.
Right.
We're trying to figure all that out. Of course, we haven't.
It's interesting you brought up 69 because I've noticed that when there's an issue there, all the traffic detours through Hancock County, which doesn't normally get involved in 69.
Right.
But like that's where you get interagency stuff where Hancock County isn't normally worried about 69 at all. But when something goes wrong over there, now it's
The demand for the travel shifts.
yeah,
to there.
because it goes straight down Mount Comfort down to 70.
Well, the same thing happens to 146th Street and 32 because you have a lot of traffic. You look at how traffic moves. It takes 69. It doesn't come downtown. It goes west to Carmel and Zionsville and Brownsburg. There's a huge amount of traffic. 20 to 30% of the traffic that's coming down 69 is actually going west, and that means you've got a whole different dynamic going on. But that's like I say, I think this is I've been here around since we did the first ITS pieces and watched I would always ask, is this a real update or is this just our checking the box update? And so this is the first real update we have some options, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the technology just wasn't there.
Yeah, right. That's what we look at too. We've talked with that in the past about interoperating with some of the cameras you guys already have on the interstate systems, right? And us adding some from our side, right? Or sensor data, so they're seeing what's happening, as traffic's diverting off an interstate, what is happening at the arterial streets.
I want to make sure that if we were putting sensors in, I remember being with Indianapolis DOT years and years ago, and there was a guy named Hadi, I can't remember Hadi's last name, Amin, I think. And he was suggesting putting in climate monitoring on bridges, freeze thaw monitors on bridges, and people would actually laugh at him, right? But it is a really funny thing. If you measure the freeze temperature of the pavement, you'd know right away, but there was no way to communicate that information out. Right. Whereas today you've got the ability, if you put those sensors in, it communicate out. Now, then the next thing you have to do is figure out what your maintenance costs are going to be on that. Right. Because you've got to make sure that whatever you put in the ground has a maintenance budget that lasts and just keeps going. Because it's no good. It's no good to have traffic sensors and have them break and have no maintenance budget for it. Yeah. But so that's why I was thinking about the cost benefit analysis has to include that long-term piece. Otherwise, it won't be realistic. People won't say, well, that's not a realistic budget for this. And then you have to have a benefit model, which really says these are really going to produce these results. And I don't know, we're far enough on the benefit model.
I just want to point out it is 12:30.
Sorry.
But thanks for coming. Our website, indiampo.org/ITS, right now it's our project page. When all this is done, this will be the page where all this stuff lives. So if you go to it right now, though, we have a link to the architecture website we went through today. That's linked on our website. Eventually we'll move probably its.ndmpo.org tentatively, but even if, regardless of where it is, it will be linked on the ndmpo.org/ITS page. So this, going forward, that's where it'll always be.
Got one other example for you, Kansas City, probably more comparable than anything else.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Kansas City has a very strong KCM, the Missouri side of the city, it's a split city.
Right.
It has a very strong presence there. They're doing a lot of ITS, but there's not a lot of other suburban. Get into Kansas side with Overland Park and Olathe, very active. And but others no. But part of that is because they're not very good. They're not very incorporated, right, along other parts of it. So it's the transit is very, Metro is very involved with it. So I think that's the better comparison.
Kansas City is a great
It's
organization.
it's actually not, we're not that different here.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of need and motivation. And
So it's
still
still
in there.
I think one last thing I was going to say, I mean, this is obviously a lot of engagement within this group. And I think going back to the previous conversation, as well as one of your last slides, the biggest thing is going to be how do we keep the momentum going? How do we make sure that whatever is the right term for MPO to be able to really be that glue with all these other entities and agencies, make sure that we can keep the pace with on a regular basis. To me, it seems like it's more like a public involvement. So even the agencies who are not engaged for whatever reason, the benefit that they may get out of it and making them aware of it, maybe using the same public involvement or public engagement approach once a year might be a good idea. Maybe doing a small workshop or forum or something just to give everyone an update. And maybe eventually they will, I mean, we will all have to work together to figure out how we can get them to get excited to be on the table. I think that's really the bottom line. And I think this group is really good enough, all the agencies involved, that can actually help make it happen as well. So
I think that's a great idea. We always find that bringing the EMA directors in is a good play, because they can preach to a lot of the other municipalities. I mean, we don't have the time to hit individually, but they grab things like this, they're like, this is a winner, and sometimes can even find federal money from their side, out of FEMA, to actually support efforts like we see in Florida, because I have a feeling a lot of the state funding that's coming down for that is based on their hurricane risk or severe weather risk, and so we don't have that level of funding here. But corridors where we're looking at transit, like through Carmel, we always have these chemical trucks carrying whatever for the farmers. I don't know what it is, but they say one of those crashes, that's real bad. Yeah. So, that's where a EMA director can assess risk and maybe help us in some of those areas to provide that.
We got a resiliency grant. We have a resiliency planning process, and so this could be, a long term. We're going to be looking we have a whole bunch of planning projects, once for resiliency and carbon, and a bunch of stuff funded. We got a slew of grants. So once those are big, part of the ongoing is what information collection will be required to maintain that information.
Right.
So it could be framed in that context of supporting, not just being by itself, sitting alone. I think sitting by itself, ITS just dies. So ITS has to be tied into the rest of our world. Otherwise it will just, it'll continue to just be kind of off to the side. And the problem is, it's not a problem with if you're not implementing systems, but people start implementing systems, they're not integrated, and that creates some issues for folks, our drivers. Absolutely. I don't know. I'm a planner. What can I say? It's a personality defect.
well, thank you, Cliff, for doing this, and thank you everyone for taking the time as well.
Thanks for hosting.